Good morning to our dear teacher with the sweetest name. May pinakamabangong pangalan na si Ma'am Imagery. We are the group 10, Ma'am, and we chose to perform orally the literature Neoclassical period. So, Neoclassical literature is characterized by order, accuracy, and structure. In direct opposition to Renaissance attitudes, where man was seen as basically good, the neoclassical writers portrayed man as inherently flawed. They emphasized restraint, self-control, and common sense. And regarding with this, we chose the Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Gulliver's Travels is an adventure story, in reality a misadventure story, involving several voyages of Lemuel Gulliver, a ship's surgeon who, because of a series of mishaps en route to recognized ports, ends up instead on several unknown islands living with people and animals of unusual sizes, behaviors, and philosophies, but who, after each adventure, is somehow able to return to his home in England, where he recovers from these unusual experiences and then sets out again on a new voyage.
We are now on setting, so here are the places where that story happened. Lilliput. Lilliput is an island on the miniature scale where Gulliver appears as huge as a giant. Bradingham, where everything and everyone is enormous and Gulliver is comparatively minuscule. One is the flying island of Lakota, inhabited by philosophers. Next is the king of Barbie, full of obsessive scientists. The island of Canterbury, where a magician enables him to speak with the ghosts of important figures from antiquity and the modern world. The Lagnan, where he meets the immortal and deeply unhappy or the Stroud Browns. The country of Wyomings, a race of highly intelligent, refined, talking horses who rule over British race of humanoid beasts known as So now we are now on theme. Gulliver's Travels' main idea is the inherent amusement of human tradition and habit, as well as the relative nature of ethics and society, dependent on historical precedent. The main purpose of Gulliver's Travel was to illustrate how the English government and society needed reformation.
And now let's proceed to the tone of the novel Gulliver's Travels. The first tone of the novel, you will feel annoyed because the protagonist in the story easily believes and don't seem to know what is being done. Second is cynical, because the protagonist, motivated purely by self-interest and distrustful of human sincerity or integrity. Next is bitter, because he counted his wife and children as the yahoos he met in his travels. And the last is happy, because the solutions he makes are still right in the events of the story. And now let's proceed to the imagery. At several points throughout Gulliver's Travels, Jonathan Swift makes use of visual, tactile, and olfactory imagery to emphasize the grotesqueness or fanciful of the human body and advance the novel's theme of relative perspective. For example, Gulliver is disgusted to witness the Brobdingnagian farmer's wife nurse her infant and describes her skin as being covered with freckles, pimples, and other imperfections. He acknowledges that the woman's skin is only disgusting to him because it is so much enlarged compared to his own, an observation that leads Gulliver to reevaluate his perspective on beauty.
We are now on the point of view of the story. Gulliver's Travel is a first-person narrative told from the point of view of Lemuel Gulliver.
Let's move on to the conflict of the story. And we all know that there are two categories or types of conflict, which is the internal conflict and the external conflict. But first, we are going to tackle about the internal conflict which the protagonist or the main character has experienced during his travel or during his voyage. First, it says here, Gulliver against his conscience. Gulliver dislikes how the Emperor of Lilliput treated him, but he still wants to help him. Gulliver cannot decide how to best help the Emperor of Lilliput to interact with the Blefuscudians. And Gulliver is angry about having to sign paperwork to gain liberty. Second, Gulliver against his thought. After he meets the Houyhnhnms, by the way, Houyhnhnms, it is Gulliver's description of the horses, and the behavior of these animals was orderly and rational, acute and judicious. And it is indeed, it is a horse that rescues him from the Yahoos. Let's continue. Gulliver considers them or the Houyhnhnms would above humanity in nearly every way. Gulliver is repulsed by the humans he firmly loves, instead chooses to spend his time in the barn with his horses. Let's move on to the external conflict. Gulliver versus Molly Olegue. Gulliver dislikes how the Emperor of Lilliput treated him, but he still wants to help him. Gulliver versus the Lilliputians. There are some laws and customs in this empire very peculiar, and if not so, directly contrary to those of my own dear country, as is stated in the story. Lilliput versus the Blefuscu or Blefuscudians. Lilliput is facing threat of invasion from the island's nation of Blefuscu. The government of Blefuscu accused the Lilliputians of disobeying their religious doctrine, the Brondrekral, by breaking their eggs at the small end. Another external conflict of the story, Gulliver versus the Blefuscu. He then wades and swims the channel to Blefuscu and catches their ships at port. The enemy was so frightened when they saw me that they leaped out of their ships and they swam to shore, where there could not be fewer than 30,000 souls. Gulliver versus the Brobdingnagians entrap him, and they treat him as a curiosity or a plaything. Gulliver versus the farmer. The farmer treats Gulliver as little as more than an animal, keeping him for amusement, and eventually sells him to the queen. Another external conflict we saw in the story was Gulliver versus the pirates, where they attack him with their sword. Another one, the people of Legado versus the king of Laputan. They planned to force the island to come so low that it would be a trap forever, to kill the king and his officials in order to take over the government. Another one, Gulliver against the Yahoos. Gulliver takes out his sword and hits the animal with the flat side of it. Okay, let's move on to the exposition of the story. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels is a well-known work of satire in which it uses the conventions of a travelogue to criticize his own civilization and its presumptions. This story makes fun of society by exaggerating how outrageous the characters and settings the narrator recounts are. Lemuel Gulliver. The novel's first-person narrator is straightforward. devoid of self-reflection. Gulliver's Travel critiques variety of fields of knowledge that are no more showy than helpful, including political, legal, scientific, and rhetorical knowledge. It also examines the claims to moral or physical superiority. The piece argues that human comprehension has its boundaries. However, the deeper conflict is Swift's dissatisfaction with the English world he satirizes. The major tensions are shown as Gulliver attempts to understand the many civilizations he sees and for them to understand him. Through Gulliver's encounter with many nations, Swift makes fun of the politics, traditions, and attitudes of England that he deems repulsive. Let's move on to the rising action of the story. The rising action of the story is when Gulliver arrives at the Laputa, he has trouble of understanding their ways. Gulliver is shipwrecked and swims to the island of Lilliput before passing out. He makes to find him bound by tiny threads made by tiny captors. Blefusco threatened Lilliput of invasion. Okay, let's move on to the climax of the story. When Gulliver is with the Houyhnhnms, he imbibed their biases and rejects human society altogether and wanted to stay with the Houyhnhnms, but he was banished because his body is too similar to that of the Yahoos, and he was rescued by a Portuguese captain, Don Pedro. From the story it says here, when I thought of my family, my friends, my countrymen, or human race in general, I considered them for what they really are. Yahoos in shape and disposition. When I happened to behold the reflection of my own form in a lake or fountain, I turned away my face in horror and detestation of myself. Let's move on to the falling action of the story. Gulliver feels even more alienated and reluctantly returns to England. Unable to bear the presence of his family, he went insane, spending his days talking to his horses to Houyhnhnm's land. Let's move on to the resolution or denouement of the story. Ultimately, it was decided that Gulliver should leave the Houyhnhnms family. Gulliver then returns to England, disgusted with humanity, and avoids his family, buying horses and conversing instead.
Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, a literature that gives us up to a larger spectrum of emotions. We learn to modify our perspective by putting ourselves in the shoes of others. We learn about who we are and who we aspire to be, and we feel the second-order repercussions of choices without having to live them ourselves. In other words, it gives us a lesson or a moral lesson. We learn from the Gulliver's Travels. The novel opens our minds to the possible that hurdles us to new and better ways of thinking. Being open-minded entails being responsive to a wide range of concepts, claims, or information, for it is typically regarded as a virtue and is essential for critical and logical thinking. Another one, having a purpose, mission, or commitment that transcends our finite human constructs is what it means to be engaged to something greater than ourselves. This entails having a commitment that goes beyond feeling good, at ease, absence of fear, receiving favor, polite, avoiding messes, or error free. It is our responsibility to accept and embrace diversity, to care and respect others, to be accountable to our words and actions. Being humble at all times. Pride is powerful. It is incredibly dangerous, for it prevents us from being learners when we actually know very little. It is like a cancer that our own perspectives and spiritual lives and blinds us two instructions of next. To live righteous is to live morally upright that reflects our relationship with the Creator. Righteousness has power and authority, leading to victory in battles. A righteous person has everything. Nothing brings peace to a man except righteousness, and is the best life a human being can live. It's a way of life and is a defense. And lastly, all human beings are born free and equal to dignity and rights. We all know that discrimination is morally wrong and harmful to both the individual and the larger society, and it serves as a reminder of the fundamental equality principle as well as the inherent value and dignity of every person. It teaches us that no one should be treated unfairly or unjustly based on aspects of their character they have no control over, including racial, ethnicity, gender, or religion. For we came naked, we return naked. That's all our oral performance, ma'am, and thank you very much.